You kids know what I love about first-person shooters? The absolute versatility of the genre. You can set them in space, set them in the past, ground them in reality, or place them in the boundless limits of the mind. And today's game, Fashion Police Squad, does what I would have thought nearly impossible and even laughable a year ago. It creates a charming, humorous, and engaging FPS game about taking down crimes of fashion. Which is admittedly a weird setup, and at face value feels like it really shouldn't work, but you know what? Developers Mopeful Games, along with publisher No More Robots, have crafted a game that understands both the world of fashion and the audience of retro shooters, and it uses this understanding to bring to life a fun, but sometimes frustrating game. The player is cast into the role of Sergeant Desmond of the Fashion Police. He patrols the streets of Trendopolis where the drip is truly lit, and the swag is off the scales. Did I use that combination of words correctly?
How do you do, fellow kids?
Des, as he's known to the rest of the Fashion Police, responds to the scene of what at first seems like a routine crime of fashion, only to quickly find himself drawn into a couture conspiracy that winds deep into the heart of Trendopolis society, leading Des on a chase throughout the city in an attempt to prevent the entire population from being turned unfashionable against their will. The story is genuinely one of the game's biggest strengths. It utilizes a sense of self-deprecating wit and charm and puns that at once parodizes fashion culture while simultaneously reveling in the exaggerated glamour of the scene. It's the kind of writing that, in lesser hands, would come off as utterly cringe and possibly even offensive, but Mopeful Games demonstrates not only an understanding of the fashion scene, but a love of it. You know how when you love something to such a deep level that you know exactly how to make fun of it without trashing it? Yeah, that's where Mopeful Games is at with their writing, pulling off a deft feat of storytelling and world building which continually left me grinning. Despite my somewhat waning attention near the end of the game, the story manages to pull out strong plot points just as things begin to get a little stale, renewing my interest multiple times throughout the course of the game. There's a hilarious scene featuring something like 3 plot twists all delivered one after the other like trick shots only a master could make, done in such a way that I was giggling with glee. And this sense of humor seeps into everything in the game, from the environments with their billboards and color schemes, to the enemy types which parody a variety of different fashion faux pas, some of which left me howling, some of which left me aghast that they were even able to sneak some of these in. The first enemy type, the dull suits, are basic bitch suits who have no color in their wardrobe, so it's up to us to use our weaponry to introduce a little flair. And then you've got the neon bras whose colors are way too loud and we need to drain the glow down to a much more reasonable level. Like, okay game, I see what you're doing here, this is fun and witty, and each time you defeat an enemy, there's a little announcer overhead screaming, "Fabulous!" or "Yas!" cheering you on as you right these aesthetic wrongs. Aiding you in this quest are the various weapons, which I never would have thought could have translated into a title like this, but damn! The shotgun is called the To Die For, and the primary fire lobs paintballs, while secondary fire drains the color out of bright objects and enemies, which in turn supercharges the primary fire over time. The machine gun is a sewing machine called the Tailor Made. Primary fire launches sewing needles rapid fire to make the fabric fit better, while secondary fire launches a fabric sticky bomb for situations where you need to cover someone in fabric first that then needs tailoring. Then there's the Drip Gun, a super soaker type weapon which can wash out color or shrink oversized clothing. But the neat thing about it is that as you use it, you're constantly charging the secondary fire, which is an iron sights, rapid fire, extra pressurized firing mode that will make short work of any enemy type that is weak to it. You can even point the weapon at the ground to make the ground slippery, which will boost your speed as you run across it, something that is absolutely necessary for hopping over certain jumps. And then you've got the Sock Gnomes, which I'll get to them in a minute. Des can also use his belt as a whip, allowing him to correct sagging pants, or to stun enemies, or to swing around the city Indiana Jones style, which goes hand in hand with the aforementioned platforming segments. Oh, and I almost fucking forgot. As you defeat enemies, you slowly charge your Fabulous meter, and once it is full, Des can use his Fab Glove, which is a supercharged melee attack which will allow you to one-hit enemies for a short period of time. Think of it like Doom 2016's Berserk mode, but instead you're zipping across the arena, literally slapping some fashion sense into enemies. It is fucking awesome. All in all, the controls are tight, the combat is fluid, so when you max it all up together, it kind of feels like an easygoing, straightforward FPS title that lands the triple without even trying, right? Well, I don't like the idea of disparaging a game like this, which has such an impressive and creative game world, but boy oh fucking boy, does it really get frustrating at times with the combat system. So with a gimmick in which each enemy type requires a specific weapon to be dispatched, you'd think that there would be a unique chessboard of enemies wandering around, requiring you to hot swap weapons on the fly as groups of them appear. And you would be correct in that assumption. But the problem with that is that the game has a tendency to unfortunately dogpile the player with groups that require 2, sometimes 3 different weapon types all at once. And due to the amount of chaos and projectiles flying across what can often be cramped arenas, there doesn't seem to be any sort of logic as to which enemies need to be taken care of first. They're all super dangerous, and they all need to be sorted. And I found myself dropped into combat situations where I literally had no idea who to focus on first, and I died so many times. And what doesn't help is that the game's weapon wheel feels stiff and clunky, so whenever I tried to use it, slowing down the game world around me as I did, I constantly fought with the mouse to try and select the weapon I wanted to use. For most of the game, I would either use the hotkeys or scroll with the mouse, but in the heat of combat, it can be anxiety-inducing to remember which slot is which. In the beginning, the game is deceptively easy. I played the demo for Fashion Police Squad during Steam Next Fest not too long ago, which contained the first 3 levels of the game, so I breezed through those pretty quickly. Around mission 5 or 6, the game starts to unveil how cruel it can get. The first enemy to display this were the Karens, loud, obnoxious women wearing literal potato sacks that need tailoring. They're screaming for the manager as they exude toxic clouds which do damage over time. Sometimes they lift up the hem of their garment and float in the air with clouds of toxicity, presumably projected from their hoo-has. Now you get it? It's because she's a Continuing onward, we're also introduced to the over-exuberant job seekers and the tourists. The job seekers zip around at high speeds, wearing too tight clothing, high on energy drinks, dropping bombs around the arena, while the tourists take pictures, which, I don't know, damage Dez's eyes so he can't see so well. But the tourists are the ones who are weak against the sock gnomes, who I now get to talk about because they feel like the odd man out in terms of the weapons, and I kind of hate using them. Sock gnomes operate like hand grenades, so you need to throw them at your target in order for the gnome to latch on. Gnomes supposedly will seek out their targets if they land close enough, but I couldn't really get that to work reliably for me over the course of the game, so I stuck with making sure each gnome I lobbed landed on their target. Now the problem with the gnomes is that there's really only like 2 enemies in the entire game they work on, even though they'll stun other enemies, but figuring out which requires a type of experimentation that I just couldn't afford in the heat of the moment, because holy fuck, everything hits really hard in this crazy chaotic game. Especially these guys, the Flamers. I kind of forgot their names for most of my playthrough, so I just called them Guy Fieri every time one popped up. Their fashion crime is that their clothes are too lit. They're full of flames, so of course they shoot fireballs all over the place. Flames which will stick to the floor and continue to burn unless you put them out with the drip gun. Flames which they somehow can toss through walls and objects and do an absurd amount of damage with. They'll also blast shockwaves of fire across the arena, either high or low, so you'll either have to duck or jump to find cover, because god that hurts so bad. But any arena at any time will toss any number of different enemies at you, requiring you to not only stay on the move, but to constantly hot swap weapons in order to hit the right enemy with the right gun, which in turn leads you to half the time firing the wrong thing at the wrong guy, and taking damage inadvertently because there's like 10 to 12 enemies who require 3 different weapons to take down. So when you've got a bunch of job seekers zipping around dropping bombs, or a couple of Guy Fieris tossing flames at you, or even
bring out the gimp.
Yeah, the Gimps are simultaneously hilarious and frightening as their muffled cries of seduction follow you around while they crawl on all fours and attempt to tie you up with a chain link whip. There is so much happening at any given time during some of these arenas that it is frankly a sigh of relief when there's only 4 guys to deal with. The game sometimes can't decide what is or isn't a solid object as well, leading to situations like this, where the train comes through the station, leading you to think that it is a solid object which can't be shot through, but if you just stand there and wait for it to depart, the enemies on the other side can and will shoot through it and hit you while you're waiting. Of course, you can shoot through the train as well, so when I came back to this encounter after dying, I started firing through the train because otherwise I was just watching my health drain. Adding to the frustration is the game's save system, which is based around checkpoints. No manual saving or quick saving in this one, kids. We have to survive from checkpoint to checkpoint, and sometimes the distance between those checkpoints can be a little longer than I'd like. Frequently, I went through sections of the game that demanded I defeat 2 to 3 waves of enemies before catching the next checkpoint. Failing that meant going back to the previous checkpoint, going through another couple of minor combat encounters before returning to the 2 to 3 wave segments that I now needed to defeat. I didn't test out whether or not the game will save your checkpoint progress in the middle of a level, because these levels, like I said, are fucking huge, and I didn't want to find out the hard way that dipping out of a level would mean starting it all the way over again. And with some of the frustrating platforming segments, such as using the drip gun to cross electrified train tracks and belt whipping across the city, the idea of starting over really wasn't appealing. At first, utilizing the drip gun to wet surfaces and boost jump over them was incredibly frustrating, as it is oddly difficult to gauge when to jump in order to maximize your distance in this game. As I got further into the game, it got a little easier, but I never really fully trusted any kind of boost jump I was asked to make. And while belt whipping was mostly easy enough for me to tackle, I am a huge Indiana Jones fan after all. There were a couple of times where I felt like I really should have connected the whip to the object I needed to swing from, and the game just simply denied me. Maybe a bug, maybe a design flaw, maybe user error. I don't really know, but there were a couple of swings I know for sure that I should have connected and landed. And these tie into how huge some of the missions are, which again makes it kind of intimidating to push through. The penultimate level took me nearly an hour to complete. The final boss, just over 45 minutes. This game is stacked to the gills with content. Huge levels, massive encounters. The boss fights are so well done, I'm willing to forgive a lot of things because they were some of the biggest highlights of the whole game. But there's also some unnecessary enemies packed in here too, some of which require you to hit them with multiple weapons because they're violating different fashion codes, and a lot of them are really spongy. Fortunately, near the end, we get the wardrobe launcher, a BFG cannon which will nuke any fashion crime no matter what, and it is the only weapon in the game that has limited ammo. I'll tell you what, that was a godsend in the final arenas and felt really good to use. Honestly, what carries this game are the Super Nintendo aesthetics and game feel. From graphics to music to sound effects, this game really feels like a first-person SNES side-scroller come to life, along with specific level challenges that only pop up once but fit the theme of the level. In one stage, Des is tasked with whipping his way across the rooftops to man a sniper nest and prevent fashion criminals from sneaking into a high-profile gala, while another puts Des on the roof of a police cruiser during a high-speed chase. These are smart, fun, and break up the routine of the rest of the game with some fresh design and clever elements. Except for one right near the end, which asks you to ride a scooter Tony Hawk style and perform a bunch of tricks to regain some style points. I have to admit, it caught me off guard that the game gave me this weird little mandatory minigame literally 5 minutes before the end and forced me to learn a bunch of controls. Like, what the fuck? I adore the graphics engine, which is deceptively powerful, notable more so towards the end levels of the game, and I love the production values. This isn't the prettiest game I've played all year, but it absolutely nails the 16-bit vibe it was going for, with bright colors and a distinct art style, something that I always value in FPS titles. Despite being frustrating in places, Fashion Police Squad is going to provide a decent challenge for those who enjoy their retro shooters to have a little muscle behind them, as well as a charming and engaging experience for those looking for something unique in the genre. Is it perfect? No, it isn't. I would have liked the weapon wheel to feel a little more fluid and easier to access in the middle of combat, and I personally could have done without the sniper sequences. I'm just not a big sniper fan, what can I say? But the game is chock full of content, including secrets, collectibles, extra outfits for Dez that provide boosts to gameplay, and 3 challenge levels outside of the 12 regular missions. For a game that only costs $20, Fashion Police Squad is going to provide a hell of a time and plenty of bang for your buck. But I'd recommend going in on a slightly lower difficulty level than you think you can handle just to get the hang of the weapon juggling. Otherwise, you might find yourself ripping your hair out as you attempt the same combat encounter for the 6th time, because fighting 3 waves of enemies one after the other with no health pickups can get a little harried. Charming, hilarious, unique, but also frustrating and a little tedious, I'm gonna give Fashion Police Squad a 7.5 out of 10 for the world, the bosses, the combat, and the number of times it made me laugh out loud. I would love to see Mopeful Games return to this world and make another Fashion Police Squad, but maybe with a little more refinement on the weapon juggling. Maybe make it so some enemies need to be stunned or hit with a gnome in order to stagger them, or create more enemies that can be taken down with multiple weapons instead of just one. Still, I do want to see more from this potential series, and I hope Fashion Police Squad does well enough to warrant it. Wow, kids, after the last couple of history videos, it felt really nice to be able to dig down and just play something breezy like Fashion Police Squad and have a nice, tidy, shorter review for once. Believe me, I do enjoy making the longer videos, but honestly, it feels really good to be able to just get straight to the point. That being said, if you're enjoying the content, please take a moment to swing by the Patreon, where all of my videos go up early before they hit YouTube, and also consider dropping by the Ranger Station Discord, where me and the rest of the crew hang out. We share memes and trade fitness tips. As always, stay hydrated, sit up straight so your back doesn't start to hurt, and give your mom a hug for me. I'll see you next time.